Welcome to the High Value Sales Show of Eversprint.com. I'm Malcolm Louie, the managing member of Eversprint, and today we're speaking with William Herp, the founder and CEO of Linear Air Taxi, an air taxi marketplace that connects hundreds of air taxi operators throughout North America directly to regional travelers. Welcome to the call, William.
Thanks, Malcolm. Glad to be here.
William, you grew your company's revenue from $302,000 in 2014 to $4.5 million in 2017, a 1,388% increase, and in 2018, you hit around $4.5 million. Before we talk about how you grew your company so fast, can you briefly share what your company does beyond my quick intro and how your company differs from the competition?
Sure. So Linear Air Taxi is an online marketplace platform that connects operators of technically advanced small aircraft, 3 to 8 passengers, all of whom are commercially certified by the FAA, with people looking for an alternative to expensive jet charter or lacking regional airline service for trips of 300 to 500 miles, where their alternative would be driving. And what we found is that we're sort of at an interesting intersection of a number of different competitive spaces. There's the air charter market, which is typically jet charters, which are very expensive, $15,000 to $20,000 on average. And then there's airline service, which, because of the hub and spoke system with which we've all become familiar, has led to a decrease in direct service to regional destinations. And then, of course, there's always driving. So we've found that we've been able to get a lot of traction and find folks who are looking for this really kind of this fourth alternative to private jets, airlines, and driving.
Can you share how you differ from the alternatives you just mentioned, and perhaps to other air taxi-like operators?
Sure. So air taxi is a term that the FAA really originated to describe commercial operators of small aircraft. But that includes a range that includes everything from a 3-passenger aircraft to really up to 60 seats. So it's a wide range. And most people, when they think of private charter, private airplanes, they think of private jets. And they think of rock stars and CEOs flying around in these. And frankly, that's not too far off from the truth. It is a very expensive way to travel, and it's a fairly rarefied group of customers that can afford to spend $15,000 or $20,000 to fly, one of these trips. At the least expensive end of the private charter market are the operators of these technically advanced small 3 to 8 passenger aircraft. And what we found is that there are several thousand of these aircraft that are certified by the FAA to be flown commercially in the United States. In fact, all of these small operators of the small airplanes have to comply with the same rules and regulations as the operators of the larger jets in terms of aircraft maintenance, pilot training, and so on and so forth. But these operators of these small airplanes, because their average trip transaction is a couple $1,000s, have not gotten the same love from the charter brokerage community as the charter jet providers have. So they don't have access to the market, to the jet charter market, because they're just, not expensive enough for the people who are selling those trips to really get excited about. And then on the other side of the marketplace, there are people who are searching for an alternative to regional airline travel. Basically the airlines have provided, have been decreasing the amount of regional service. So as an alternative to the airlines for direct trips, say from Austin to Norman, Oklahoma, or from West Palm Beach to Tallahassee, Florida, or from, the Los Angeles area to, say, northern Arizona, there are these trips that constitute about 15% of the total market for U.S. domestic air travel that are poorly served by the airlines. So really, the people that are coming to Linear Air Taxi are facing a 4 to 5, 6 hour drive each direction, and they go online and they're looking for an air travel alternative. And we've connected the marketplace with internet travel search sites. We've been on Hipmunk and Kayak for a number of years. And just recently, in the last couple of months, we've completed a technical integration with SABRE, which is the system created by American Airlines back 50 years ago to connect travel agents with the airlines. And now travel agents, both offline and online travel agents, are able to see linear air taxi as an alternative as well. So really, we're competing against private jet charters on the basis of affordability. We're competing with the airlines on the basis of serving routes, if you will, that the airlines don't serve, and we're competing with automobile driving on the basis of time savings.
Now, are there other air taxi marketplaces out there?
There are a number of air taxi marketplaces that focus on high-end jet charter. So there are companies that have staked a claim trying to create technology solutions for jet charter companies to sell directly to their consumers. But because of the high ticket price, if you will, $15,000 to $20,000 for a transaction, most consumers who are able to spend that kind of money, seem to prefer personal service provided by charter brokers. There are companies, lots of companies out there that provide charter brokerage service that a customer can call, and that broker will then go out and look at all the different jet charter providers and come up with a solution for them. There are a couple companies that are more direct competitors with us, competing for the lower, the lower priced charter alternatives, the air taxi alternatives. However, so far, it seems that all those competitors are focusing on really organizing the supply side and really don't have much in the way of demand generation capability, where we've really spent a lot of capital and a lot of time investing in the technical connections to the travel search channels that represent 60 to 70% of how all air travel gets booked in the U.S.
Now, if I were to fly from, say, Austin to Norman on an air taxi that I found through your marketplace, what's the price differential between flying an air taxi that I found through your marketplace versus a commercial airline, if any, that have a route between the two?
Well, I could go to our website and give you an exact price if you like, and email it to you so that you can buy it. But off the top of my head, let me just give you some sort of estimated numbers. So a flight from Austin to Norman would probably be, an hour to an hour and a half in an air taxi. It would probably be 6 or 7 or 8 hours driving. You probably would have a better sense of that than me. So you can see, you'd be able to, if you wanted to, for example, go up and meet with someone at the university with a couple of your colleagues. You could get up there, in the morning, have your meetings, turn around and come back and do that all in one day. Where it would be a challenge to do that if you were driving, just because of the amount of driving that you would have to do.
Right.
And I'll venture to say there are no airlines that fly directly from Austin, Texas to Norman, Oklahoma. You might be able to find one that connects. Chances are that you might not be able to find connections that would allow you enough time to have your meeting, meaning that you might have an overnight stay, leading to more time inefficiency and more expense and cost. So for, a roughly 3-hour trip, an hour and a half up, an hour and a half back in an air taxi that would seat, say, 3 people, that would be about $2,500, something like that. So
Okay.
You're looking at $800 plus per person, which puts it into the realm of feasibility for many travelers.
Right. Now, if we were comparing, say, between San Jose and Los Angeles, would air taxis be a good option in that situation where there are lots of flights between the two, and sometimes they can be very inexpensive, and as well as very expensive depending on when you book?
Yeah, less so. That's definitely further away from the sweet spot for the value proposition of air taxi, because there are good airline alternatives. What we found is that sometimes on the margins of the airline's schedules, there still is an opportunity for air taxis to provide value. If someone wants to, say, depart, early in the morning or return late at night after the airline's schedules have stopped, providing service, there still can be an opportunity. So there is still a fair amount of demand, between, LA and San Francisco, if you will, between the Bay Area and Southern California.
Right. Okay. And can you give me an idea of the kind of planes that we're on? I know you said advanced planes, but what is that? Are we talking about jets? Are we talking about turboprops? Are we talking about something altogether different. A little Cessna that has leather seats, so
Yeah, it ranges from a little Cessna with leather seats up to turboprops and light jets. But the sort of probably the poster child for the air taxi industry is an airplane called the Cirrus SR-22, which is a very modern design. It's made from basically composite plastic materials, so it's very fast and the lines are very flowing. Has gull wing doors, has leather seats, has a full glass cockpit, meaning that it has computer screens instead of the old round dials that the old aircraft would use. And those computer screens and the computers behind them essentially provide a tremendous level of capability, ground proximity. You essentially get Microsoft Flight Simulator in the cockpit. You see the numbers of the runway as you're rolling out onto the runway, and so on and so forth. Advanced weather avoidance capability. You have the weather channel in the cockpit. Advanced traffic avoidance capability. You can see and avoid all the other aircraft flying around you. They're on the screen. Advanced autopilot functionality that can maneuver the airplane in 3 dimensions and fly an approach down to within a couple of 100 feet of a runway, providing envelope protection so the airplane won't be stalled and won't be can't be flown outside the envelope. In the case of the Cirrus, it even has what's called a whole frame ballistically deployed parachute system. So there's, in the event of a catastrophic failure, the parachute can be deployed. It's a 30-foot diameter parachute that lowers the whole airplane to the ground. And Cirrus is the number one producer of small airplanes in the world today. They've been at it for 25 years. They just recently introduced a small jet, a single engine jet. And they really are the market leader. And as a result of Cirrus bringing all of this advanced technology to the light plane market, all of the other manufacturers have followed suit. So every small plane produced today, be it a Cessna, a Piper, a Beech, a Cirrus, a Mooney, what have you, they're all produced with these advanced glass cockpits. So they all have this advanced technology that makes the airplanes, very safe and very credible, in terms of their ability to get from here to there. And be able to do that safely in most weather conditions. The power plants are typically piston engines, so they're piston propellers. There are a few that are turboprops, meaning that's a turbine engine or a jet engine that spins a propeller. And as I mentioned, Cirrus now has this new small jet, which actually has a single turbofan engine mounted on top of the fuselage that provides the thrust for the airplane. So,
okay. So while you're talking, I keyed in Cirrus SR-22 in my web browser and I pulled it up so I see what it looks like. It looks like a small plane. It looks like it's kind of a tight fit, right? It's not like you can stand up and go to the bathroom or anything, right? You're kind of, once you're in the plane, you're there until the flight takes off and lands, right?
That's right. I mean, the experience is in many ways like riding in a black car, right? You're in a luxury automobile type environment, and you get a headset which is noise canceling. So any of the wind noise or engine noise is canceled out. You can communicate with the pilot. You can listen in on air traffic control. But yeah, the average trip length is probably between an hour and an hour and a half. So that's mostly what it is. So yeah, once you're in, and you go fly and you land and you depart from the private terminals and arrive at the private terminals. So they use the same facilities as private jets, and the pilot personally greets you and carries your luggage, and it's a very, very genteel experience, let's say.
Right. Okay. Got it. Now, going back to your sales growth, right? You grew from 302,000 in 2014 all the way to 4.5 million in 2017, flat in 2018. Can you share what were the 3 biggest drivers of your sales growth over that period?
Sure. Well, when we first started, the marketplace, we had been for several years prior an operator of air taxi aircraft. So we understood from an operational perspective what the issues were. And further, we had made investments in our technology platform to provide, essentially leverage around the ticketing and customer service and sales functions. So we took that experience and those assets and turned them into the marketplace platform. So the first year or two was about adapting the technology from an in-house computerized reservation system into a marketplace platform. And we started with a small number of third-party operators, integrating them in until we could, get a handle on the process, right? The process of acquiring a customer, booking a trip with an operator, taking payment, making payment, providing customer service for changes, cancellations, all those sorts of things.
Was this back in 2014 or before then?
That was 2013, really, and into 2014. And then in 2014, we decided to expand geographically and began, with a single aircraft type. We started with a single aircraft type, the Cirrus SR-22, and we just expanded to all of them in the United States. And then in 2015, we decided to essentially expand to all of the air taxi aircraft in the country. And so we expanded into, all of the, we basically took all of the aircraft that are these 3 to 8 passenger, propeller driven aircraft from the database that's published by the FAA and loaded them into our marketplace platform. Okay. And then in 2016, we began expanding our marketing footprint. Had a big project in 2016 to take all of the possible routes we could serve, create static web pages around them, about 350,000, and make them available for search engine optimization. And then 2017, 2018 were all about building the technical integrations to connect with the systems used by the airlines to sell to travel agents. And it was a 2-year project because it's not an insubstantial project to try to take an air taxi purchase, which is a whole plane purchased at a schedule determined by the customer ultimately, and sell it through a channel that is designed to sell seats on scheduled airline flights. So suffice to say, it's a difficult challenge, which we have finally managed to surmount. So the expectation is that in 2019, our growth will start to take a more vertical trajectory again. And, somewhere it's still early days in terms of the impact of SABRE, but from what we're seeing, we're expecting 50 to 100% growth this year.
Nice. Now, just to recap from the drivers you shared with me over the past few years, one, you developed the platform, so that's one driver. You made it happen. Mm-hmm. Two, yep. You expanded the supply of air taxis available on your marketplace, both by expanding geographically for the SR-22s and then opening it up to all different types of air taxis. Another driver is that you start ramping up your marketing, right? So you created 350,000 static web pages, which I assume is essentially every point-to-point destination. Is that what you did? So for Austin, you would have a static web page for every airport that your air taxis could fly to. Is that how it would work?
That's exactly right.
And then in 2017, you spent a lot of time and resources integrating your platform into SABRE. And there's another one that's very big, right? There's SABRE, and then there's one other one that's huge. I forget the name.
Amadeus.
Amadeus, right?
Amadeus is the global leader. Yeah, we've integrated with those two.
Oh, awesome, fantastic. And so that would be your next big driver, right? Just you've essentially increased the demand for your product because now more people can find it more easily.
That's right. And depending upon how things go in 2019, we may tackle integrating with the last couple major reservation systems that are used by the airlines. There's under the umbrella of Travelport, there are 3 systems that we could integrate with that would essentially get us the rest of the travel agent systems covered. And one thing that's important to note, you did a great job of recapping what we've done over the course of the last 6 years. And one way that you could think about it is sort of a spiral staircase, right? Where you sort of revisit the same issues as you continue to go up. So, we started off with building the staircase, right? The base of it by getting the platform constructed. And then we started by loading in some supply and then selling that supply, creating demand for it. And then as we went around the staircase, increasing the supply, focusing on increasing the demand for that, and so on as we've gone up. And I think one thing that may be of interest to your listeners is just a reminder about how the availability of capital, affects the pace at which, you can essentially move up that staircase. we've had a relatively modest amount of investment, a few $1,000,000 over the course of 6 years, which has, required us to proceed, at a measured pace, and be able to really demonstrate the return on investment of the actions that we're taking, both in terms of building out the supply and in terms of generating the demand. And the expectation now is that in 2019, it's going to be about, essentially levering the investments that we've made in the travel agent channel.
Right. So going forward, are you going to be able to fund your expansion from internally generated cash flow, or do you have bigger plans that might require additional investment from investors?
Well, it's interesting. I'm sure you've heard the old saw that, right, a bank won't lend you money unless you don't need it. So
right.
that could be applied to investors more generally, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've had conversations with a variety of different kinds of institutional investors over the years. We've experienced what a lot of small companies have experienced when they've gone out to the traditional venture capital community, which is, this is interesting. I'd like to see you get to, 1,000 trips. Okay, we got to 1,000 trips. Oh, that's interesting. And now I'd like to see you do this, So the old phrase, bring me the broom of the wicked witch of the West, right?
Yep.
And that all of that said, based upon the funding that we've deployed, which has come mostly from private individuals and existing investors in our business, we've gotten to the point now where the plan we have for 2019 is self-funding, and of course that means that now we're generating interest among prospective investors. I had a call over the weekend with a gentleman who wants to write a check. He likes to write checks of $1 million. Just a wealthy individual, very interested in the aviation space. Whether or not anything comes out of that, who the heck knows? We certainly would be able to accelerate our efforts with additional capital. We're at the stage now, however, that the prospect of self-funded growth is real, and the offset to that is do we really want to give up a significant portion of the equity that we've created and dilute in order to bring in more capital? So we're working our way through that, and so I'm sure there'll be opportunities to spend some time talking about what we do with prospective institutional investors, and there may be a deal to get made.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and from your perspective of these institutional investors wanting to see you hit certain milestones, right? If you ever watch Shark Tank, you see those guys doing
Sure.
the same exact thing, right? They want to, they're more keen on business ideas that are proven, where they have a certain level of business that happened, as opposed to just a nice idea.
And that makes perfect sense, right? As putting on my investor hat, that makes perfect sense to me. It just makes it challenging, as a startup enterprise, to kind of get the capital that you need, unless you really have some venture capitalist who's really taken a shine to a particular market segment.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see, frankly, this year, with the prospective IPOs of a number of big marketplace companies, whose names I don't even probably need to say for everyone to know, but whether or not that liquidity will find its way back into more marketplace investing, or we'll move on to something else that no one's even considered yet.
Yeah. Well, for me, I think you need to let me know. Which marketplaces are you talking about that have imminent listings?
Well, Uber, Lyft.
Right? Okay, right.
Those sorts of companies that are talking about big IPOs this year,
right?
Which ostensibly will generate liquidity options for their existing investors, and be interesting to see what happens with that liquidity.
Yep. Now, do you see yourself in any way as being an Uber-like, Lyft-like business?
Well, there are certainly some parallels. We're an online marketplace. They're an online marketplace. Our suppliers are a fragmented group of small business people, with a couple thousand aircraft and a few hundred operators. The average number of aircraft operated by any of these small businesses is 2. So they're quintessential small businesses. The fact that the existing private air travel, ecosystem doesn't really pay much attention to these operators. So from that perspective, there is a parallel. then that's where it sort of ends, in that we're using on the demand side existing distribution channels to try to attract demand, as opposed to going out and spending hundreds of millions of dollars, developing a customer base through the deployment of a proprietary app, let's say, which is
Yeah.
how Uber and Lyft have approached it.
Yeah.
So there are some parallels,
The biggest
and
difference,
certainly.
though, the
Sorry.
biggest difference though might be that the likes of Uber and Lyft, there's almost always cars available wherever you may be. But
Mm-hmm.
for your particular case, there may not be an airplane available where I am right now that's willing and able to take me to where I want to go. Wouldn't that be safe to say?
Yeah, I think that gets to the sort of demand profile of a prospective customer, right? Very few people need an air taxi to take them, pull up in front of their office, in 10 minutes to take them someplace. Most of these regional trips are planned out a week or more in advance, so that's another difference. That said, we have like a 97%, fulfillment rate with getting trips that are requested fulfilled. So we do have a very high match rate between requested trips and the ability to provide for those. And if we even have in many markets multiple suppliers with multiple options. So it's the supply side is actually fairly rich as it stands right now, based around most of the major metropolitan areas in the United States.
Now, your air taxi operators, now are these people that own the planes as a business, or are they people who own planes and they're hobbyists or part-time pilots and they would just like to have more flights?
Yeah, and I guess this is another difference from the current Uber and Lyft model. It really, what we have are people that have small businesses, similar to the original Uber model, which was, originally it was commercially licensed black car service providers, if you remember that far back. And then Lyft got into guy with car and kind of made Uber, match from a competitive perspective with guy with car. But guy with airplane is not a great idea. You want to have commercially qualified and commercially regulated aircraft and pilots, which is what all these companies are. So even though it might be an individual with one or two airplanes and a very small business, again, they have gone through the process to be certified by the FAA to operate commercially, which is usually a more than 12-month process to get that certification. The airplanes go under significant scrutiny from a maintenance perspective before they're allowed to be flown commercially, and then they have to have regular maintenance at a much higher level, more frequently and with more replacement parts than an airplane that's flown privately. And the pilots themselves have to go through rigorous training to achieve the level of a commercial pilot, and then have to go through specific training for the operation and the aircraft that's being flown by that company. And then every 6 months, the pilots have to do recurrent training and recurrent checking. So every 6 months, the pilot of one of these air taxi operators has to go for a ride with an FAA inspector. And if they don't perform up to standard, they're no longer able to fly, and until they get retrained and can pass the ride. So it's a very high standard that carries a lot of risk. The guy could be out of a job. So the traveling public can count on the qualification of both the pilots and the airplanes because of the very high standard that the FAA holds them to.
Are these standards any different from the ones that the commercial airline industry has to adhere to as well from a pilot training and maintenance perspective?
Well, so there are sort of different levels within the commercial business depending upon the complexity of the aircraft that's flown and how big it is. So commercial airlines are sort of at the top of that because they're flying the biggest airplanes that require two pilots to operate them, with the largest number of passengers. Now, that said, they essentially are subject to the same level of maintenance and training as the guys flying these small planes.
Right.
They have to, the airline guys have to go for an instrument proficiency check every 6 months. The air taxi pilots have to go for an instrument proficiency check every 6 months. The airplanes have to be maintained, to the manufacturer's recommended program. which a private owner could choose not to do that, and in many cases they do. A privately owned airplane has to have an annual inspection, where a plane operated commercially has to have, sort of every 3 or 4 months typically is going in for an inspection. And if there's any issue, it can't be deferred. It has to be repaired right away, where privately owned airplanes don't. So, even though there are sort of different levels of, oversight and the amount of organizational capability that an operator has to have at the baseline, the pilots and the aircraft are essentially maintained to the same standards.
Right. Okay. Got it. Now, from a marketing perspective, before we got on the phone here, I did do a little research to take a look at what kind of marketing you're doing, at least online. I see that you have a pretty heavy SEO presence from my tools, 6.3 thousand organic keywords. I assume that's how many destination pairings that you have in the United States, right, between any two cities. But I'm not seeing any pay-per-click advertising. What's your thinking beyond that?
Yeah, well, we've done some testing with Google AdWords in the past, and we've had some success with it. Somewhere in the neighborhood of depending upon the keyword set, $400 to $600 to acquire a customer. So we've had some testing, and certainly if we had, additional capital to spend to accelerate growth, we might consider spending it on, SEM. But, given the relatively constrained amount of capital and the requirements that we discussed earlier about having to, continue to build out the technical connections, we found that, the better bang for our buck currently is in focusing on building out the connections to SABRE and Amadeus and the others, and doing the search engine optimization piece to try to, improve our organic.
Have you been able to do the analysis to figure out what your cost per customer acquisition from your organic search efforts work out to?
The effort to create all those static pages, is sort of a significant one-time effort, and then there's been a modest amount of maintenance. So it's not the same as SEM where you're sort of paying per click or paying per view or whatever.
Right.
It's a more sort of longer term look. It's not just based upon how much did we spend this week and what did we get this week. I can say that these days the continued investment is minimal, and we're getting significant numbers of people who are tracking through our website who originate from an organic link, every week. So it's, from that perspective, you could say the return is infinite, but because, the variable cost is essentially zero, and it continues to pay big, dividends.
Right. And like, for example, if you had 1,000 visitors who come across your site from your SEO efforts, how many of those become a customer?
It's probably in the order of about 10 or 15. We're sort of down at the 1 to 1.5% conversion range, which is, pretty standard within the aviation industry. And I'll tell you, by contrast, the number of people who request quotes through the SABRE system and the Amadeus system and then convert into bookings is about 10%. So it's like it's a 10x increase or 10x difference between those two channels.
Right. But the costs are astronomically different between the two as well, right? For SABRE, if they go through, there is a marginal cost that you're paying, right? Whatever that I imagine you're probably paying a certain dollar amount per transaction that occurs through SABRE.
Yes, although it's a relatively modest amount because the pricing in SABRE is based upon tickets, which the SABRE pricing model is designed around airline tickets, and so it's a relatively modest sum as a percentage of our average transaction value, which is as mentioned between $2,000 and $3,000. Then and of course there's some other fees that we're paying to maintain the system, some of which are periodic and some of which are monthly. But the actual variable costs on a transaction basis are fairly modest.
Right. So even with the connections you have to Sabre and Amadeus, you still need to generate demand, right? Right? You want people to ask their travel agent about a flight from Austin to Norman because they know it existed because they've done some search and some research or they saw your marketing and talked about it, right? As otherwise they might
Absolutely.
just have their agent book them between the major cities and then they with the expectation that they're
Hmm.
gonna have to hop in a car and drive an hour or two to get to their final destination.
Hmm. Well, one thing that we found that we had anticipated, and it's now bearing out, is that Sabre powers a lot of corporate travel systems, like SAP Concur, for example, and others. And so corporate travelers are seeing us now inside their systems, inside their travel management systems, because we're being powered, because they are being powered by Sabre, and we're showing up in that way. So it's great in that we have, end users, travelers essentially finding us through these travel agent distribution systems, just the same way that people going to Hipmunk or Kayak would find us. So that's great. Um, but you're right. I mean, we need to be able to explain the value proposition of air taxi relative to private jets and the airlines and driving. We need to be able to, answer people's questions about what is a technically advanced airplane and how is this, how are these commercially operated airplanes, different from the privately operated airplanes, small planes, all those sorts of things. And not only end users now, but now we've got the channel to educate as well, going out to travel agents. So one of the significant uses of proceeds that we're contemplating if we raise another round would be to essentially create a B2B sales organization to go out and educate the travel agent community, starting with large corporate travel agencies like American Express, Global Business Travel, and Carlson Wagonlit, and also Concur, and the large corporate users, about those things. So yeah, marketing never sleeps. You're right.
Yeah. Which kind of segues into the next question I have for you, and I think you've touched a little bit upon them already, but maybe we can elaborate a bit more. What do you see as your biggest challenges in 2019 from a marketing and sales perspective?
Yeah. Well, so back to the spiral staircase analogy, right? So where I feel we are is, a few revolutions up the staircase in terms of building the platform, bringing in all the capacity, making the connections to travel search, and now the travel agent systems. So now we're sort of we've created this travel agent system connection that really this year our biggest challenge is going to be communicating the value proposition of air taxi to those travel agents and to the end users who use those travel agent systems.
So, what would you say would be the metrics to measure that you've been successful in communicating the value of linear air taxi to the travel agents and the end users? What metrics are you looking at to gauge your success in that endeavor?
Sure. So, one key metric that we have that appears to be significantly different in the travel agent channel than it is in our direct channels is the cancellation rate. So, um, and again, this is early days. We went live with Sabre January 10th, so we're, whatever that is, 40 days beyond that at this point. But in those, 5 weeks, we've seen that that the booking rate, as mentioned, is very high as a percentage of the quoting rate. Um, and we've also seen that the cancellation rate is very high. So we've got a few theories about why that might be. That the travel agents are booking linear air taxi because it looks just like an airline to them. But then as they dig into it further, they start to have objections, which we're not in a position to overcome because we don't have a direct communication channel with them. Small plane. Oh, this is charter. My CFO has a moratorium, has a ban on charter, those sorts of things. So I think reducing the cancellation rate will be will be a metric that will give us comfort that we're doing a better job of addressing that big challenge that I described for this year, which is educating the agents and the end users on the value proposition of air taxi.
So now you said your cancellation rate right now is on the low side. Is that, or did I mishear you?
No, it's well for the travel agent channel, it's higher than it is for our direct channels. So they book at a higher rate
Okay.
and they cancel at a higher rate. And we're just starting to understand, reaching out to those travel agents to say, okay, why'd you book it in the first place? What about it was attractive to you? And then the next question will be, and then why did you cancel it? What happened? Between the time that you thought it was a good thing to book and the time that you said, oh, we have to cancel this, and what in there represents an objection that we could overcome through marketing or through some sort of sales effort.
Right. Now, when someone books through Sabre, you can tell who the other party is. There's no Sabre doesn't hide that from you.
No, they don't hide it. However, the communication protocol for transferring data back and forth is very, very kludgy. Remember, Sabre was created when computers were created back in the 60s, right? So the message transfer protocol is TTY, right? Teletype, right? So we've got two messaging gateways, one asynchronous and one that's a little bit more synchronous. But the messaging is very arcane and requires a fair amount of intelligence on our side to parse it out, be able to manage it. So we have in a transaction that comes across through Sabre, we have the name of the travel agent and their contact information. We have of course the passenger information. We have the billing information, which goes through actually a separate entity in order for us to get paid and for Sabre to get paid and the travel agent to get paid. And most of the time we have contact information for the traveler as well when a booking gets completed. But because of the nature of the messaging being this very old, as one of my CTO friends called it, effed up text, although he wasn't as discreet in terms of describing it. It's a bit of a challenge to be able to pull that information out and make it useful.
Yeah, and I imagine the travel agents, their whole game is volume, right? So they might not be receptive toward dropping whatever they're doing and speaking with you about why they didn't go ahead with the booking as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I understand that the travel agent's main concern is providing a good service, to their customer, right? They are the agent of the traveler. Um, and you're right. We've created some connections at a high level within a couple of organizations: American Express, Global Business Travel, Carlson Wagon Lee, SAP Concur. And our hope is that by working at the management level, the executive level, there we'll be able to start to communicate the value proposition down through their traditional communication channels to the people sitting at the desk.
Right. Now, are you marketing to the past passengers who had booked through your platform over the past few years as well?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Actually, going back prior to starting Linear Air Taxi, I was in the internet marketing business in the mid and late '90s up until the early 2000s. I started a company called eDialogue, which is an online marketing company that initially was focused around email back when email was first becoming a thing. And so we carry forward that sense of the importance of internet marketing, direct marketing, and of course, marketing to your base and all the rest. So we have, it's email-based program of communication with our customers, with a little bit of segmentation around those who are higher value, and trying to provide a little bit more personal contact with those folks and the people that arrange their travel. But yeah, definitely, continuing to market to the people that have bought from us is an important consideration.
Yep. And you're doing that through email primarily, or are you also uh, marketing to them through other channels, direct mail, perhaps? Maybe doing.
It's mostly through email. That's the bulk of the repeat purchase marketing program that we're doing, and we've got an email program that that includes a welcome message when people first become customers, and then we've got kind of 3 different themes that we rotate through on a monthly basis. Picking out one of the classes of air taxis and talking about prospective destinations, and then just generally for people that have gotten on the list but may not have been a customer, the benefits of air taxi,
Right.
kind of what is air taxi.
Right.
And then we have, for our platinum customers, those people who travel more than 4 trips in a 12-month period, we have some direct mail and some premiums that we send out to them in their offices and those sorts of things.
Right. Now, does it make any sense to leverage your air taxi operators to get them involved in your marketing? Say, here's a platform that you can refer your customers to make it easy for them to book a flight with
Uh-huh.
you. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, well, certainly we've thought about that, and if I were to show you our architectural roadmap for our platform, which is very much driven by marketing objectives and business growth objectives, you'd see that in there along with lots and lots of other ideas like building. Right now we don't have apps. We've decided that given the relatively modest resources that we have, we're better off building, desktop and mobile optimized versions of our sites. And that's continued to work well for us. And we've talked about building, interfaces for the operators so that they can, do a better job of telling us what their availability is and refer customers and all the rest of those sorts of things. So, all things, of course, are made possible with money. And in the short term, we have our bubble chart that says, okay, these are our biggest impact strategic ideas. Where those are in the upper right hand corner of the chart, and the ones that are sort of a little bit further down doesn't mean they don't have any value. It's just that they represent a lower priority as it stands right now.
Yeah.
So we do have operators though, even without a specific organized program, who refer customers to us. In fact, we've got a number of operators. Again, if you think about the average operator I described, right, one or two people in an organization with 1 or 2 airplanes, they are more than happy to offload the marketing, the sales, the customer service. People calling up saying, "I want to change my departure time from 10 a.m. to 10:15 a.m. Hey, can I bring my dog? What about golf clubs? My whatever. Someone's sick. All these different kinds of things. They're more than happy to have us deal with that. In exchange for our 15 or 20% of the transaction. So we have a lot of operators now who tell their customers, call Linear Air. You'll eventually come back to me, but I can offload all of these, non-core activities.
Yep. Yeah. Essentially, you could be their marketing and sales arm.
Absolutely.
Right. So,
that's right.
Okay. So if there's one big challenge you'd like to overcome for 2019, what would it be? It sounded like it might be the education of the travel agencies, especially those who are using SABRE. That sounds like that might be the biggest challenge, that once you can overcome that, it can have the biggest revenue upside as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And, we do see, again, in the very early days of being online with SABRE, a tremendous amount of activity. So there's a lot of interest in, being able to have an air travel option for these routes, these city pairs, these airport pairs that aren't served by the airlines, and certainly aren't served in any sort of direct flight capacity. So that, I think, gives us, a lot of excitement and a lot of comfort around the quality of the investment that we've made making these connections. And now what we need to do is just, kind of improve the communication and the travel agent's understanding of the value proposition. And
yep. And And what are your plans to do that this year, to do the education? How are you going to reach out to them? I know you talked about building up a B2B sales force, but that takes time.
Yeah, that does take time, and that would be a use of proceeds of a round of capital. So what we're doing in the short term is, it's good old fashioned test and learn. It's the basic hallmark of direct marketing. So we've now got data, that around quote requests, people looking for trips, how those convert into bookings. And we've got information about how many of those ultimately fly and how many of those cancel. So, on our dance card for this week is to take the email addresses that we've collected of those bookings that have ultimately canceled and send out an email campaign to those travel agents. And if there are any ultimate travelers in the mix, to them, and, ask them a couple of structured questions. One, why did you book it in the first place? And number two, why did you cancel it? And, we'll get some data back from that. We may find that we don't get, as much of a response as we would like, and we'll have to come up with another way to try to get that information. But, it's all about testing and learning. And then
Yep.
We will be taking what we're learning from this direct interaction to some specific high leverage meetings with those large travel agents that I described. SAP Concur, we're already sort of like iterating with them back and forth on how best to display and describe what linear air taxi is. And we have a meeting in process of being pulled together with Amex Global Business Travel, doing some research on their side about what they're seeing for activity. So we'll test and learn, and we'll take the resources that we have, basically myself and the other executive member of the company, and spend some of our time having, high level meetings with these entities that have the potential to give us a lot of leverage in terms of communicating.
Right. So how many email addresses do you think you're going to reach out to of the council bookings so far? Of the past 5 weeks, how many council bookings have you had?
I don't know that number off the top of my head. I know as of our board meeting at the end of January, which was, 3 weeks into it, we had several thousand quote requests and several hundred bookings, and about a third of them had canceled at that time, and of those bookings, which left us with net bookings still at a very high rate. Still at, if you figure 10% conversion from quote to booking, and a third of those end up canceling, you're still at 6.5-7% net bookings on those quotes. Still very happy. So there's probably 100 or 200. There's probably a couple of hundred people that we can reach out to at this point. It's a large enough database that I expect that we'll get, a representative sampling of response back, and then we can start to, craft a message that we can then use in our discussions with these larger travel agent companies to be able to communicate to their end users, to their agents and their end users.
Yeah. So if you reach out to 200 travel agents who had done a booking and then canceled, and just to get some feedback as to why they canceled, of the 200, how many do you think will reply?
Great question. When we send out, we use the Net Promoter Score paradigm to track customer satisfaction. If you're familiar with that, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend us to a friend or colleague? We send that out automatically from our system to everybody who flies. So right after the trip is completed, I think it's a day later, they get an email like that. And I'm not sure if there's a selection bias or whether or not we could extrapolate from that, but we get about 30% of those people respond. So I'd be happy with 10% of the travel agents responding. My guess is we could probably get, again, based upon my email experience, crafting an email in terms of who it comes from, not looking like spam. It'll come from me as the CEO of the company, asking them for their input and advice. And there will be a follow-up to non-responders, a week or so later. My guess is probably get between 10 and 20% participation.
Okay. Yeah, for me, whenever I've gotten survey requests, people want me to respond to, whatever I did do or didn't do. I personally rarely respond unless I had an extremely great experience or an extremely poor experience, right?
Right.
On the fringes. Otherwise, in the middle, I rarely ever respond to these things.
Yeah, I agree. And that's, one of the reasons why we won't be making it a survey. It won't be click here to take our survey. It'll be, hey, I'm the CEO of this company. You booked this trip and then you canceled it. Would you share with me the reason why you booked it and the reason why you canceled it? I'm just basically looking for a text email back. And if someone reads that email, then they could say, I could see them responding with a few words and make it relatively easy. That's one thing that's, the ease of response certainly has a positive correlation with the number and percentage of respondents that you get when you do these sorts of things.
Yeah, definitely. So, 3 last questions for you.
Sure.
If you decide to put up a billboard somewhere in one of your markets along a fast-moving but yet busy freeway, what would be your message on that billboard? And keep in mind, people generally only have 6 seconds to see your billboard before they drive by it.
Yeah. We've actually tried billboards way back in the day, and that the billboards that we did were targeted to specific travelers on specific routes. So so from that perspective, it's sort of a there's a better way to get to Nantucket, right? You can fly from uh, this airport that's outside of Boston, as opposed to having to go all the way into Boston and then to fly to Nantucket, which is an island off the coast of Massachusetts. Um, and so it really needs to get down to some very, very focused um, segment of people who are experiencing a very particular type of pain in order for that to work. And as a result, we don't do much billboard advertising. We've never done any in
Right.
the past. So our billboard advertising has been, someone says, gee, I wonder if there's a way to get from Hanscom Field, that's outside Boston, to Nantucket, and they go on and they Google it, and then they come up with essentially our billboard, which is our SEO result, right? So, um, so the at, so just to sort of generally restate that, the best messaging in terms of its responsiveness, as we have seen it over the years, relates to specific destinations,
Right.
right? Departure destination pairs, because that's where people are feeling pain.
Yeah. I just, as you were talking about that, I was just thinking like last summer we were driving from Austin to not the San Antonio. I forget this other town that's on the eastern edge of
Uh-huh.
Austin. It's a fairly big town. El Paso, Austin to El
Mm-hmm.
Paso. And I was
Mm-hmm.
just thinking, if you had
Yeah.
a billboard that simply said, how's your drive to El Paso coming along? You only have
Right.
4 more hours to go. What are you
Right.
gonna do over the next 4 hours? So
Yeah, exactly.
something
Yeah.
like that, I think would have caught my
Or
eye,
the
thinking,
license
man,
plate.
I wish we'd flown there instead. So,
Yeah, and again, so that's been the most successful marketing for us, has been that which is related to a specific trip, and because that's where people feel specific pain. They don't feel it generally as sort of like, take an air taxi instead of flying the airlines. It's like, what are you talking about, right? There's not enough specificity in that message to an individual in order to motivate any
yep,
action, right? It has to be, as you said, you know, um, save 5 hours driving from Austin to El Paso, and do it for a price that's affordable, and fly privately while you do
yeah,
it. So
definitely. Two last questions for you. Who are your ideal customers, the end buyers of your flights, and who are your ideal travel partners, air taxis or travel agents who you would like to attract? And what's the best way for them to contact your firm?
sure. Well, as it stands right now, our best customers are those people who have obviously a need for a regional trip, 300 to 500 miles, ideally in a small group, because remember, they're paying for the whole airplane. So their per passenger cost is lower if they have enough people to fill up the plane. And then further, ideally for a day trip, right? Going out for a business meeting, going out for a sporting event, going out for, a graduation, a wedding, those sorts of things. Um, and then because under those scenarios, the sort of same day round trip price, is more affordable than, a multi-day round trip price, which is effectively doubles the cost. So those people who have same day round trip traveling in small groups on regional trips, represent our best customers right now. And of course, people can find us on Kayak, on Hipmunk. They can work with their travel agent, and they can come directly to us at www.linearair.com and search and buy from us directly there. And the in the future, we expect that to be able to do things like make the empty seats available on a flight available for others to purchase at a few $100s, at a fraction of the price of a full charter, and be able to provide pricing on an empty leg. If someone's flying out to El Paso today, but they don't need to be picked up until next Monday, the airplane will fly back empty. So being able to offer those, which will come with volume, the more volume we have in the marketplace, those opportunities will present themselves. So in the future, I think there will be many more opportunities for people to get involved, because the price point will come down. And then on the supplier side, our ideal supplier is really the independent entrepreneur in this space, someone who owns the airplane, flies the airplane. They are giving terrific customer service because it's their plane and their name on the line. Those are our best customers. And then, of course, those who've invested in, more technically advanced aircraft, that improve passenger comfort and improve their ability to fly in more weather conditions. That helps us as well. And one of the things we're seeing is that, more as we bring more demand, operators are adding more supply, both, individual companies adding airplanes and other companies adding airplanes of this type in order to participate in the business.
All right. And how about on the travel agent side? Are those folks that you like to attract and engage?
Yeah, so those that we're going after first would be those who would be ostensibly, we think, working with the types of customers I described, right? People traveling on regional trips in small groups for day trips. And so that leads us to the business community. So again, working with corporate travel managers and travel agents who specialize in business travel, we believe will be the sort of lowest hanging fruit as we go out and start to communicate with the travel agent community about the value proposition of linear air taxi.
Okay, fantastic. Got it. Well, thanks so much, William, for sharing with me how you've been growing your business.
Sure thing, Malcolm. It's my pleasure. Thanks again for the time.
We've been speaking with William Herp, the founder and CEO of Linear Air Taxi, about his company's rapid growth. For interviews with other fast-growing, high-value sales companies, or to learn how we can accelerate your firm's high-value sales through automation, visit eversprint.com.